let's move on to our second amateur, John. John is a club player, and when he pivots and turns his shoulders, he does a pretty nice job with this first fundamental. It's not the cleanest pivot and shoulder turn, but he has executed all the various elements necessary for this step. Done a good job turning his shoulders sideways. His feet, his pivot is a little bit ambiguous, but he has pivoted. And he's got both hands on the tennis racket, as opposed to Lucien, who had released too soon. But I will say that on other forehands, John has released too soon. So this particular part of the pivot and shoulder turn is a little bit inconsistent. When John takes the racket back, he's got the same problem Lucien had, that pendulum backswing. That's going to interfere with the fifth fundamental. He's also loaded up the weight on both feet as opposed to his outside foot. He has done a nice job of turning his shoulders sideways and extending his non-hitting arm out across his body. But on other forehands we looked at, John didn't extend that other arm, so this particular part is a little bit inconsistent. Let's move on to the third fundamental. When John swings to contact, he pushes off both feet. Again, that's because he didn't load up properly on that outside leg. His body doesn't rotate fully. He's not facing the net at contact. He only turns a little bit. And because he's only turned a little bit, his swing with the arm and the racket is a little bit constricted. It's too much arm in there, and it's not the arm and the body turn working together. And if you look at him at contact, he's kind of shrugging. He looks like he's tight, like he's really muscling the ball. And again, that's because he doesn't have that shoulder turn in there to help his arm swing the racket forward. Now, if we pay attention to his non-hitting arm for a moment, you'll notice that, if we go back to his preparation first of all, he's got that arm out across the body. But then he brings it out of the way, but then it comes back and he's bear hugging himself. And what that does is it constricts his shoulder turn. So one of the reasons he's not facing the net, that he doesn't get that full turn in there, is because the other arm is coming across the body, holding his shoulder sideways. And this motion, the bear hug, is very common at the club level, and it's why a lot of club players have way too much arm when they're swinging to hit the ball. If you add all this stuff up together, the fact that he's not pushing off his outside leg, the fact that he doesn't have enough rotation in there, and the lack of rotation is making his swing constricted, he's arming the ball, that moves the contact point back, and you can see he's kind of hitting the ball off of his front hip, as opposed to out in front of his body, which is where all pros make contact with the ball. The follow-through is a function of what was going on prior to and at contact. Because John is doing a couple things wrong, it's going to make his follow-through a little bit awkward. And his follow-through looks a little bit uncomfortable. He's facing the net at the completion of the follow-through. He hasn't really extended out in the direction that he's hitting it, a little bit, not a ton. Has turned the forearm and the wrist over like he had the watch on, trying to check the time. That is good. But that bear hug has made the whole motion look a little bit uncomfortable, like I said before. And so if he fixes the things he was doing prior to contact, if he swings properly, that's going to help him get that smooth motion on the follow-through. And finally, the fifth fundamental, John doesn't have that continuous swing path. That goes back to that pendulum motion he had in there when he was preparing to hit. So let's keep this train moving and compare John's forehand with Tommy Haas. Here they are at the start of their motion. Both pivot and turn their shoulders. But remember back a minute ago where I said John's pivot was a little bit ambiguous. Well, there's nothing ambiguous about Tommy's pivot. Tommy executes this fundamental and every other fundamental very deliberately. You can see clearly he's pivoted and turned his shoulders. John, the quality of the execution isn't quite there. So it's not just a matter of doing the fundamentals, it's how well you do them. The better you do them, the better your forehand's going to be. So let's watch these two guys execute the second fundamental, and we'll freeze it right here. Start with Tommy. All the weight is on that outside leg. Knees bend, you can see it's all there. His racket's all the way back, body's of course completely sideways, and his non-hitting arm is extended straight across his body. Great extension with that left arm. Let's transition to John. Well, ambiguous, it is way less clear that John has executed all the necessary things to complete his preparation. When we watch these guys swing forward, let's first focus our attention on the feet. Tommy had done a great job loading up on that outside leg, so he can really push off when he swings. John, on the other hand, because it wasn't really clear where he had distributed his weight, the push-off is a lot less clear. He's certainly pushing off his outside leg, but there might be a little inside leg in on the action as well. Let's move on to the upper body rotation. Tommy is sideways to the net, so is John. And when Tommy rotates back during his swing, he is now facing the net at contact. He's done a fantastic job, unsurprisingly, of rotating back towards the net. And you'll notice that he's hitting the ball out in front of his body. Looks very comfortable at contact. Well, John doesn't rotate fully when he swings. He gets a little bit of rotation in there, but he's clearly not facing the net at contact. And look at what that does to his contact point. It has pulled the contact point back. It's basically in line with his hip, and it's not out in front of his body like Tommy. There's a clear difference between contact points between Tommy and John. Tommy, like I said before, looks very comfortable. John looks a little jammed, and that has to do with the body rotation. Let's move on to the follow-through. From contact, Tommy extends out in the direction that he's hitting, turns the forearm and the wrist over, brings the racket across his body, and of course, he continues to rotate after he hits. It's very smooth, nice and easy way to slow himself in the finish when he's hitting. Well, John, because his contact point is a little off, it's going to make it difficult to accelerate in a comfortable way. He kind of extends out in the direction that he's hitting, but he doesn't really extend out